Hey, Uncle Doug.
Uncle Dan.
It's there's a world out there of people believing things.
Yeah, indeed.
I don't know if you realize this. Lots of people believe lots of stuff.
That's
Despite our
unfortunately
best
true.
efforts.
Right,
Yeah,
exactly.
exactly.
Despite everything we've done.
Just stop. Everybody just don't believe anything anymore. Just stop believing all the things.
Believe in yourself.
Not
Just
even
try-
in yourself.
No, don't fuck that. We don't need. Just don't believe. Just wander
Yeah.
around the world with no connection to anything. And
Yeah.
and then the Buddhists win. I don't know.
That's the future that humanists want, right? It's just a total disconnection from everything. So
Yes, exactly.
today I'm going to talk about something that might convince you to do just that. You know?
Okay, good.
So, as you guys know, I've been on a little bit of a cult kick recently, and I don't know why. They've always tickled me. Maybe it's because I survived and left something that was, at least in my personal experience, very much a cult.
Yeah.
And, I've always been fascinated by them, how they form, how they tick, and, who starts them, what kind of person starts them, and what draws all sorts of people to them. So
Yeah.
they're always dangerous. And as what's that?
No, I just think what could be more fun than a cult?
What could be more fun? I don't like sports, so I pay attention to cults. So, they're always dangerous, and they're, as we've shown, very, very often accompanied by a substantial body count when the shit goes down.
Yeah.
They very often find themselves crosswise with government authorities, unless, even more insidiously, as in the case of today's cult, they become friends of or even instruments of an evil state. So, a functioning state should usually be casting a wary, legalistic eye at any new messiah and whatever unregistered firearms his flock are inevitably accumulating. Not so with today's group, dear uncles. Today I want you to meet Colonia Dignidad, the absurdly misnamed Colony of Dignity, which, as I'll show you, was anything but. So let's go out, reach back in time a little bit.
Dignified colony. Those undignified colonies are so messy.
You'll see that their major export was indeed dignity. So let's reach back through the mists of time to the ruins of post-war Germany, where the rug had very much been ripped out from under the very Christian, very conservative country. Not only had they been fully fucking destroyed by a decadent West with gasp, black and even Jewish soldiers in their ranks,
Gross.
but also by the hordes of the godless Russians from the East. So, as this won't sound familiar at all, the nationalist clown turned messiah Hitler had led them from promises of restored glory into total ruin. One German who was fervently supported his Führer from a young age was a guy named Paul Schaefer. Schaefer joined the Hitler Youth as soon as he possibly could in the 1930s,
Well, when did he
and
go to-
ended up working as a nurse.
When did he end up on Late Night with David Letterman?
Yeah. That's a good
Yeah,
question.
I know. It was weird. That was just everybody gets a second act in life, I guess. But so he worked as a corpsman and nurse through World War II, and his little town in the East was completely wiped off the map by the Red Army on their crushing march to Berlin, was kind of their habit. So as I'll show in this segment, Schaefer was a defective piece of shit and realized the ruins of a once stable society was now a free-for-all for any malevolent criminal to satisfy his cravings.
Yummy.
Schaefer declared himself a fire and brimstone Baptist minister and set up an orphanage to care for the countless parentless children Hitler's cataclysmic dream of Germanica had created. Yeah, just what Germany needed, right? Like a fire and brimstone preacher.
Well,
after
that's who you want taking care of the orphans. The fire. You don't want somebody nice and
No.
kind and loving. You need that stern taskmaster type for the orphans.
Well, and spoiler alert, Schaefer was a voracious pedophile.
Oh, hooray!
Surprise!
And where better to exactly big surprise. And where better to find defenseless victims than in the rubble of a totally destroyed country?
Yeah.
But before long, the good pastor was accused of sexual abuse of several boys in his care and immediately took the well-worn path of so many culpable Germans in the post-war years, the one that led to the politically friendly right-wing regimes of South America. So the imperious Schaefer landed in Chile in 1961, somehow with around 70 people that still followed him. And he found as remote a place as possible to set up his Christian heaven on earth far from the prying eyes of the authorities, in a quiet valley in the rural center of the country with no paved roads and only one way in or out.
That all sounds perfectly reasonable and safe for all concerned.
You know, we need to come up with
It's a normal thing to do.
We need to come up with a cult bingo card.
Right?
Right? Like, going to South America, check. Pedophile, check.
Right.
Yes.
Yeah, exactly. Finding
Weapons
your
caches,
own,
check.
Finding your own, like, tiny space where no one can get to you. Check.
Right. A vacant valley somewhere in the frontier, right?
Right.
Literal Nazi, check. Sarin gas, as you'll see here, check.
Oh, great.
So
that's a good one.
The place was quickly enclosed in high fences with barbed wire, a guard tower, and booby traps. You know, Jesus things. So work was mandatory from age 6 or 7 on. Work was agrarian to support the colony, and they did things like baking, blacksmithing, construction, etc. Workers, again, from age 7 on, worked 16 hours a day, got 1 rest day a year, and were never paid a cent. So,
What?
Wow.
Wait, hang on.
yes,
What was the rest day? What day was it?
I don't know. It didn't say what
It's
the rest day
today!
It's today.
was. Yeah. So essentially slavery.
Yeah.
Right?
That's what that is.
Imagine the magnitude of their Monday, right? Oh, fuck. Back to work.
You almost
So,
probably don't want the 1 rest day.
Right.
Like, at that point, it's just torture.
Well, you know,
It is.
yeah.
I mean, the cruelty is the point, which is, again, reflected in our own society more and more. But
Although I do have to say, I will say
it gets
this.
crazier.
One of the nice things about this cult, because we talk about all the similarities between all the cults, have we had a cult that's had blacksmithing before? I say thee nay. That's the first.
Well, and that's a good point. Specifically mentioned, probably not. So it gets weirder. Marriages were dissolved upon entry. Babies were taken from their mothers at birth and raised in a communal nursery by other women. Children had no idea who their parents were, and parents were very much encouraged to forget who their children were. And despite Schaefer's sexual proclivities, he did everything possible to drive any sexual impulse or desire out of his flock. Forced medicating, especially of girls, was mandatory, and both boys and girls were subjected to sustained genital electrocution with actual cattle prods to the point of near death.
What?
He saved most of his venom for women, who he clearly despised, always calling them dirty sluts and whores. So again, he's a classic cult leader. The guy's right there. Yeah. So the system of abuse and co-abuse Schaefer established was nightmarishly effective. In group sessions, he would frequently beat the shit out of men, women, and children as they publicly confessed their real or fabricated sins. Then he would hold and caress them as they bled and sobbed. He had several aggressively trained bloodhounds and, of course, German shepherds that he would just randomly sick on members of his terrified flock, even children, pulling them away at the last second. Wow. So people lived in absolute terror of him and his dogs and his lieutenants. So he had a kinder form of tough love. If you fell into his displeasure for whatever reason, you may sit at the common dining tables for as much as a week, watching everyone else eat 3 meals a day, but being denied so much as a crumb. And then if anyone offered you food, they would share your fate, and the slave labor conditions didn't relent for those who were punished with starvation and severe dehydration. Yeah, it was good times.
Yeah, I mean, you've picked a real treat of a thing to talk about.
What a peach.
What a
I
nice
can imagine
guy.
at some point you're like, yeah, post-war Germany wasn't so bad.
Exactly.
Can we go back?
Let's go back and live in the rubble.
Fuck, let's go back to Nazism.
Right. Those were good times. Like so many of the fuckers we've discussed in these cult religious, explorations, the founders are first and foremost psychologically deranged deviants, right? Yeah. So in the normal day-to-day of the world, they couldn't get away with their crimes for very long without being noticed and paying steep consequences. But religion provides a pathway to power for any cunning and ruthless abuser to create an extra-legal world in his deranged image. So Joseph Smith created a missionary program that had a perfect twofold purpose: bring eager new recruits with both cash and daughters to his various New Jerusalems, and second, to separate the daughters already under his eye from their missionary fathers and husbands for years at a time. Brigham Young doubled down on that, kind of, creating a class and seniority-based system of rewards and terror enforced by the murderous Porter Rockwell and the secret paramilitary, the Danites. And then Muhammad, of course, claimed to be in direct contact with a particularly violent version of God. So who could question his marriage to a 6-year-old named Aisha? But don't worry, Muslim apologists claim he didn't consummate the marriage until she was about 9.
Right.
So it's all above board. But in every case we've looked at, a damaged person sees the insanely overindulged and underregulated bubble of religious protection as a safe space for them to act out their true desires. So here, in Colonia Dignidad, Frank Schaeffer created... did I call him Paul Schaeffer earlier? I did. Jesus Christ, it's Frank. Sorry, Paul Schaeffer, sweet Canadian musician. This is not him.
And
Don't
also
sue us.
sorry to everyone whose Googling has been fruitless for the last 15 minutes.
Shit. Yeah, sorry about that. Frank Schaeffer. Anyway, despite its trappings of traditional Protestant German values, this place he created shattered the very idea of family and created a population of beaten mules who were too busy and too afraid to ever speak against him. And he trapped them behind barbed wire, booby traps, attack dogs, and machine guns. Schaeffer's world was like one of our shitty dystopian heavens, but a million times worse and actually real. It was a heaven for one particular pedophile and monster, himself.
Yeah.
And the erstwhile parents of his victims were so victimized themselves and dehumanized, they were desperate to try to help him enforce the hellish order.
You know, it's it's things like this that make me realize, you know, we've discussed the fact that hell doesn't actually appear in the Bible, but was an imposition onto the Bible after the fact. It's things like this that make me realize, oh, this is why people saw the need for such a place. Right. Like, it's a very clear representation of real things that can happen when awful humans occur. Yes.
When awful humans are given, are given the opportunity to do things without much oversight, right?
Right.
So outsiders were rarely let into the colony, and when they were, the population showed up in their Sunday best of mid-19th century happy German peasant wear, all scrubbed and smiling and singing, playing brass oompa music for the guests. Now, Douglas and I came from an extremely abusive family situation, and I only bring that up because I can attest that while I wanted nothing more than to die in my sleep or for someone to rescue me somehow, I was at the same time far more desperate to present the illusion that everything was fine, right? So whenever company came over, the fear of our parents' rage and violence was paralyzing. So we smiled and laughed, and we told anecdotes about our pets like we were the fucking Brady Bunch.
You put on your best dirndls and lederhosen.
That's right.
Yeah, just about.
Our finest corduroy.
Our family corduroy out of the hope chest. So I kind of understand the theatrics of people stuck in the constant panic of abuse and fear.
Totally.
So, now it gets weirder. So as I mentioned, Schaeffer had eagerly joined the Hitler Youth in the 30s, served as a medic in the German army during the war, and because evil nihilists always seem to find each other out there in the world, he came into contact with and gave some safe haven to Nazi fugitives who fled to the right-wing South American countries just like him. And among his secret German guests was one of history's most evil men, Joseph Mengele, who was for those who don't know, was the angel of death at Auschwitz concentration camp, who sent the weak to immediate death and the stronger to a slower death of starvation, exposure, and slave labor, and experimented on unanesthetized children among his infinite other crimes. Another guest was Walter Rauff, who was the man who invented the earliest form of the Nazi gas chambers, mobile ambulances that killed at least 100,000 people. So
Holy
these people
shit.
passed through, they passed through Colonia Dignidad. So Schaeffer obviously had Nazi sentiments. I would suspect less from an intellectual/political leaning and more from a sense of very much liking how their form of terrorizing brutality could allow him to continue his abuse indefinitely.
Totally.
So the workings of fate in the form of the CIA would, in 1973, place a man after Schaeffer's own heart into power in the presidential palace in Santiago, the loathsome Augusto Pinochet. So, for those listeners who maybe don't remember this awful time in history, the CIA helped blow the shit out of the Chilean White House, the La Moneda, killed the left-leaning democratically elected president, Salvador Allende, because they thought he was a communist and would nationalize the copper industry, et cetera, et cetera. So they helped Pinochet come to power. Pinochet, of course, portrayed himself as the protector of Christianity in Chile, and himself was a Nazi sympathizer and a ruthless right-wing dictator. So Schaefer was a really big fan.
By
so
the
he
way,
and Pinochet soon became.
Do you know what day Allende was killed?
It was September 11th.
September 11th. Yeah,
That's fun.
Yeah,
it's a great day.
It's a good day. It's a good day not to get out of bed. So, so Schaefer and Pinochet literally became good friends. And Schaefer offered the off-the-grid 500 plus acres and facilities of his Baptist child rape and slavery hellscape to Pinochet to help him disappear some of his most hated anti-fascist enemies. And so his secret police could, with the help of many godly Christian Nazi fugitives, figure out how best to glean information from them. So because life above ground in Colonia Dignidad was not evil enough, there was and still is a network of underground chambers and tunnels where the most insidious work of the most insidious Pinochet regime was carried out, and the majority of the enslaved cult members above ground had no fucking clue what was happening beneath their feet.
What?
So
Hail Hydra. This is some amazing shit.
Exactly.
Isn't it and it gets crazier. So our good Baptist pastor Schaefer was present at many of those torture refining sessions, according to several survivors. I couldn't find any direct eyewitness account of Mengele being present, but it seems Schaefer, despite his amateur enthusiasm for torture and human suffering, had some more experienced help from the old country in crafting how the Chilean secret police would refine their torture methods. Now, it's not fully known how many people passed dead or barely alive through this religious hellmouth, but investigators believe it's 200 at least, and they have discovered one mass grave there with, I think, about 75 bodies.
Wow.
Bingo.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Yep. There. Check. So Paul Schaefer made a fatal error in the late 80s.
Called him Paul again.
His seething hatred of women. What's that? Did I call him Paul? Yeah. I got to look it up. He might be Paul. I've confused myself. Please don't.
Please
don't sue us. So don't sue us, whichever one I got wrong.
Right.
So anyway, he made a fatal error in the 80s. His seething hatred of women and his barbaric attempts not only to suppress the sexual impulses of his flock, but to ban any and all romantic or familial longings in them, coupled with a drought of German immigrants, because life in Germany had gotten better, meant the supply of preteen boys he preyed upon was running out. So in desperation, he opened the prison gates to impoverished local Chileans who were eager to take advantage of the school, the quote-unquote hospital, etc., that existed in this little slice of Germany. The problem was the children who came had established family ties, unlike the ones that he had been preying on, right? And they knew that who their actual parents were, and that they could turn to them if something was up. So one brave 12-year-old victim of Schaefer's rape went to his mother, who bravely went to Santiago to find help, which she did, and it all started to come undone. So in 1990, Pinochet's 17-year reign of terror ended. Not really fully, as part of the deal of him leaving power was he was named senator for life and head of the armed forces for life. So he still held, enough power to keep himself out of jail. But the government at long last began to investigate Colonia Dignidad. Schaefer fled Chile as 25 former cult members came forward with sexual abuse allegations. Like I was saying, the great Christian prophet Schaefer did what so many of God's mouthpieces do when challenged. He ran like a fucking thief in the night and disappeared. But Chilean police searches of Colonia Dignidad turned up a cache of machine guns, bingo, grenades and rocket launchers, right? And it was discovered they had labs for creating chemical and biological weapons, bingo, even the deadly sarin nerve gas, because, as listeners well know, these things are commanded in the Book of Armaments. So it's an old atheist saw to say that religion is behind every war and bad thing that ever happened in the world. It's also not exactly true. Certainly not 100% of the time. I'd venture maybe 80% of the time, if I'm being honest. Certainly in the case of the Chilean murder regime of Pinochet and the hellish secret rape and torture camp of Schaefer, it was absolutely the case.
By the way,
so a tiny bit of justice. Yeah.
Sorry, don't mean I've looked it up. It is Paul. We're dealing with Paul Schaefer Schneider. But he went by Paul Schaefer.
Cody, fix all that. Yeah. So in a tiny bit of justice, Schaefer Schneider was found and immediately extradited from Argentina, a country with its own long history of Nazi sympathies and church-backed mass political murder, and was sentenced to a mercifully short 20 years in prison. He died after just 5 in 2010. That's just 9 years ago.
Wow.
So there are hundreds of survivors of this nightmare still trying to put their lives back together and get some compensation. This isn't ancient history. It's a thing still going on today. And Colonia Dignidad still exists, but now as Via Bavaria. That's right, fellas. It's a lovely little German-style town for tourists to visit and have some schnitzel and beer, or maybe stay a night in the modest hotel. If the few remaining residents will talk at all about the hellacious goings-on there over nearly 40 years, of course, they downplay all the unpleasantness. So that's the cult of Colonia Dignidad, guys.
Oof,
the colony of dignity.
Damn.
If you think it can't happen here or now, I would just say, look at those pictures of America's highest-ranking and most pious ever Christian, Vice President Mike Pence, staring with disdain at cages crammed with people fleeing poverty and violence. And look at the face of Pence's companion at that nightmarish human zoo, our idiot Utah Senator, the very Mormon lover of white male human freedom, Mike Lee. So somehow the one American who knows literally nothing about Christianity has become its greatest hero, and the evangelicals that haunt all our law enforcement agencies have turned themselves into the willing lieutenants of this imbecilic comb-over Reich. So laws and morality be damned. But until civilized people finally separate church and society, there's there's nothing more necessary than the fight to keep church and state separate. And I think Colonia Dignidad is an excellent example of that fight.
Boy,
yikes!
So
well, there you go.
On that hopeful note,
everybody have a happy week.
Go to sleep, little one.
Let's enjoy.
Let's move on before we all just can't have anything but nightmares for the rest of our lives.
Bye.